digital world that they deserve. And the reason that I'm here and chairing this event is that, in fact, Five Rights are proud to be the secretariat for the writing and the creation of the general comment on the digital world on behalf of the Committee of the Rights of the Child. So I want to start by thanking the steering group who are actually doing this work, all the many hundreds of experts around the world who've supported the work and given us the benefit of their expert advice. And of course, primarily and most importantly, the children who've engaged in this process, about which we're going to hear a little bit more later. The Committee on the Rights of the Child also are due our thanks, because in deciding to do a general comment on the digital world, what they've done in one fell swoop is let the world know that children's rights do apply everywhere. And that is a crucial fact that I think has been missing as we've developed into a digital world on and off seamlessly. So we are going to hear from many people today, and I'm going to turn very quickly to our speakers. But before I do, I want to just say one small thing about the Secretary General's high-level panel on digital cooperation, because as we've been undertaking this work, he actually instituted a major piece of work that was in a way set on the same path that says, what is it in a digital world to have human rights? What is it in the digital world that we need to do together to ensure it is a world that we want? And what role does the UN play in that process? And I actually recommend the report that they wrote, and many of us contributed to that report, because it is littered with statements like unlock a more equitable world, inclusion for all, including the most vulnerable, skills development and training, protection of human rights in the digital era, artificial intelligence that's trustworthy, human rights based, promoting digital trust and security, and making digital governance a priority. And those kinds of issues are the issues that have been at the heart of our task on behalf of children, who are in fact 1 in 3 of the users globally. So I want to really just pass over to our panelists, and the first of whom is Professor Sonia Livingstone, who is known to many of you and has been the lead author in the drafting of the general comment, and I think she's going to share her experience with us. Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you very much, Biban, and thank you to those who have joined today. I'm really looking forward to the discussion, so I'm going to try to be fairly brief. But I do just want to set the scene a little bit and give you a sense of, first of all, the problem that the general comment is designed to address. So I think, as everyone at the Internet Governance Forum knows, the digital is bringing about all kinds of transformations. But this group, and I'm guessing those here today, are concerned with how the digital is reconfiguring children's lives in ways that have profound implications for all of their rights. So I think what we're witnessing these days is the public calling on states to act more in children's interests, though often that call comes through as a call for protection, more than perhaps for some of children's other rights. We see states struggling to address even questions of protection, let alone the other rights, and really struggling with questions of internet governance, given the complexity of the digital and its transnational nature. As Baroness Kidron said, children are 1 in 3 internet users, but they are largely invisible within internet governance circles. And I'm really delighted that everyone here is kind of trying to bring that change and awareness of children's rights to the IGF. The child rights community is increasingly giving its attention to digital matters, but it must be said is fairly new to the world of internet governance and technological innovation. And while all these stakeholders debate and discuss and try to get up to speed with what's needed, children are often the pioneers in all things digital, and they are facing problems both because of the lack of access on the one hand, and the problems that access brings on the other hand. So the general comment came about, we could tell many stories of its origins, but the work really began in 2014 when the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, which is responsible for the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, in 2014, it held its annual day of general discussion on digital media, kickstarting a process that 6 years later has led to the draft text of the general comment now being posted on the OHCHR website. So for those who don't know, and I didn't before I began this work, a general comment is around about 10,000 words long, and it constitutes an authoritative statement of what is expected of state parties as they implement the obligations in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So in 2019, the committee held a public consultation on this general comment and on what it should contain. And frankly, they were overwhelmed with the level of interest and input worldwide into what this 10,000 words should contain. We then, as a team, held a global children's consultation, which Amanda Third led, and we'll discuss in a minute. And all of that input found its way into the draft general comment that's now open for public consultation and will be on the website until November the 15th. So one paragraph near the start of that text says, I quote, "The objective of the general comment is to provide guidance on legislative, policy, and other appropriate measures to ensure full compliance with the obligations under the Convention and its optional protocols in the light of the opportunities, risks, and challenges for children's rights in the digital environment." So to explain some of the issues involved in the drafting, and I'll be very selective because I don't have long, I just want to say something briefly about the Convention on the Rights of the Child and something briefly about the nature of that digital environment. So the Convention on the Rights of the Child was adopted in 1989 and has been ratified by all states except the United States of America, which is a significant omission in this context. In all contexts. It asserts that the Convention asserts that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights applies to children. Of course, it shouldn't have needed saying, but somehow it did. It asserts that children are rights holders in their own right, but also that children are entitled to special care and assistance for their protection, well-being, and full development. It has 41 substantive articles, all of them important and relevant to children today as in 1989, but all of them open to questions about how they can be implemented best in relation to the digital environment. Among those 41 articles are 4 fundamental principles, which kind of cut across all the articles. And those are the right to non-discrimination, which you will immediately realize is newly significant in this age of algorithms and machine learning. The right to have, for children to have their best interest taken into consideration, which is, I suggest, newly significant in a time when platforms and digital services are not sure. So they say exactly who are their users, let alone the circumstances of their users. It's the right to life, survival, and development. And that raises some very kind of hard-hitting challenges about life and survival, and some very interesting and often culturally contextual questions about what fullest development means. And last but absolutely not least, it includes the right to be heard. And it's interesting going back into the history of the Convention, which I will not do now, to note that children's right to be heard was the most controversial article in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And I know everyone here is committed to it, and that's why Amanda led this consultation. But in internet governance circles, there is still a lot of work to be done in order for children's right to be heard. And crucially, just to pick up one other article, the Convention pays careful attention to what is called the child's evolving capacities. And the evolving capacities is the way in which the child rights world thinks about age development, the difference between a baby, a 5-year-old, a 9-year-old, and so forth. It applies, evolving capacities applies from birth to 18, and is again newly significant given the preference in internet governance circles for kind of bright line regulation around 13 for COPPA or 16 for GDPR and so forth. So my last couple of seconds, I will just say what I think everyone knows about the digital environment. It's difficult to define, it's continually expanding, it's ever less optional, it's ever more infrastructural in our lives, it's cross-cutting in its significance for almost all of children's rights, which in turn encompasses almost all of children's lives. It's consequential for the whole of children's lives, not just for those who are online and not just when they are online. It's shaped and operated not only by states, the traditional focus of the Convention, but also by many other actors, notably businesses, notably the most powerful global corporates of our time. And the digital environment relies heavily on data processing, making the child's right to privacy of unprecedented significance for all their rights to provision, participation, and protection. And as I already indicated, it's blind to the real world nature or circumstances of its users, though arguably ever less blind, not knowing or claiming not to know even who is a child, let alone their circumstances or their vulnerabilities. So drafting a general comment has been challenging but fascinating. I'm going to hold my thoughts on the actual challenges for the discussion and pass over at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sonia. And can I do a call out to the people who are listening, who are there? I've seen some of your names, we know some of you, and we know that you have views on this matter. So I'm really encouraging you to make early observations, to ask questions of the panelists as we go, so that we can actually learn from you as well as tell you where we are at. Because as Sonia says, we have struggled mightily with some of the issues and some of the edge cases around this. But can I now invite Dr. Amanda Third to talk to us. She's done a remarkable job of consulting with children, and I think that what she has found is of great interest, particularly on this question of the right to be heard. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Vivan. It's a great honour to result of this consultation. I do want to acknowledge the support from the Five Rights Foundation and the London School of Economics. Also my colleague Lily Moody, who's worked very closely in coordinating this study with me, but also the 28 organisations internationally who convened 709 children in total in order to bring this consultation to life. It's been a magnificent collaborative effort, and I think speaks volumes to our capacity to mobilise around these issues when we want to. So very briefly, we've run these consultations using what we call a distributed data gathering method, which basically means that we develop a workshop manual and then we train facilitators in organisations around the world to run workshops with children. We've run this process several times now before, and indeed have worked with children in up to 70 countries, and we're very pleased to be able to roll it out again this time with the support of our partners. The process was very, very straightforward. In a sense, we began by mapping the key issues on which children had been consulted around their rights in relation to the digital environment and identified the gaps we needed to fill. Then we developed the workshop tools and trained facilitators, conducted the workshop, and then we took part in, we unfolded a process of co-analysis in which partner organisations and in some cases children in those countries helped us to interpret the findings of the consultation. And we've then, I mean, a big part of this process was to channel children's insights into the drafting of the general comment itself. So we then undertook a process where we mapped everything children had said and you know, directly drafted what children were demanding or calling for into the general comment itself. So I think I don't have a lot of time to go into the findings in depth, but I do just want to share with you a few overarching insights that children have generated. I think it's worth front-ending this by saying that one of the key tensions that children navigate is indeed the tension between their own understanding of their rights, to the extent that they've developed that, and their use of technology to realise those rights, and the understandings of adults more broadly. There are deep generational tensions that children are calling upon us to address. So I think it's important to start by saying that children see the digital as an overwhelmingly positive influence in their lives, and they see it as a major vehicle for realising their rights. They have quite an expansive vision of the way that technology can support them to realise those rights, but at the same time, they're also conscious in general that technology can undermine their rights. But overwhelmingly, they have a very positive view of technology around the world. However, access, that is routine and reliable access, is the biggest obstacle that many children face. Children talked about everything ranging from unreliable electricity infrastructure to prohibitive costs of technology and data plans, but they also talked about other kinds of obstacles to their access, including, as I said before, the attitudes and dispositions of the adults around them. So one girl here noted in Canada that access can be limited very much by the values of those who make the rules. And indeed, generally, children are navigating quite a lot of constraints on their digital access, whether they're using that's because, you know, that's because they're using hand-me-down or second-hand devices, or navigating rules or other such obstacles. So access really requires a concerted effort. Obviously, if we're going to leverage technology to support children's rights, we need to ensure that children have appropriate access. In terms of information, children see technology as vital to their access to information, and that information informs many dimensions of their lives. It's key to them understanding themselves as members of their generation, of their communities, and it's fundamental to the ways they imagine their future. There is a deep concern about misinformation among children, and what this consultation revealed was that many are disinclined to trust media companies in particular. They tend to trust governments a little more, but information, information for them is a vital part of everyday life, and they're calling for better quality information in the languages that they speak, and in particular they want more information about things like sexual and reproductive issues, how to deal with mental health challenges, and so on. Oops. One area where children really highlighted that technology enables them to realise their rights is in relation to leisure and play. They see it as a critical vehicle for them to relax, socialise with others, experiment with new hobbies and so on, and that this is beneficial for their mental health and well-being. They generally recognise the need that they have to balance online activities with other activities, but they also call for adults to recognise the importance of the digital increasingly in their leisure and play practices. Privacy was a big issue for children. Indeed, when we've conducted these consultations previously, children have primarily focused on interpersonal issues of privacy. Now they're deeply sensitised to the data collection practices of private entities, and they have an enormous number of questions about how their information is being collected, stored, and used, and who indeed might be profiting from it. They see the right to privacy as absolutely fundamental to their realisation of the other rights to which they're entitled. And on that question, children are up in arms about the forms of economic exploitation that they are potentially exposed to online. They don't see it as a fair trade generally. The majority of children don't see it as a fair trade, to trade their data in exchange for free access to free services. They've got a lot of unanswered questions, and they're really calling for better education around privacy and the ways their data circulates, as well as improved industry practices. On family, the jury is out for children about whether or not digital technology supports their right or their interactions with their families. Some say that it strengthens the family relationship. That tends to be when children are using technology with other family members at certain points of their day. But also they see that technology causes a lot of friction in their family, and they worry that families are not communicating in the ways that they should. So too, though, they see a double standard at play in their parents' practices. So they see their parents preaching particular rules and approaches to digital technology, but they see their parents doing different things themselves with the technology. And you'll see here that one young person in Chile highlighted that, she really feels like her parents are not paying enough attention because they're focused on their technology. Children see technology as a game changer for their right to education, but they really, many don't have appropriate levels of access at school for that to be a meaningful thing in formal education, and many lack the teachers who are qualified to support those digital practices. Nonetheless, children reported that they feel they learn a lot via informal mechanisms online. So too, the generational theme tracks through to children's rights to expression and assembly. Children really see technology as vital to the ways that they can express themselves and come together around particular issues that concern them. But they are very concerned that adults don't appreciate why they would do that. So too, I think in terms of culture and identity, obviously children are doing a lot of identity work through their engagement with the digital environment. Many still don't, or say that they still don't have enough access to cultural resources in languages that they speak. So that's just a quick snapshot of some of the findings that have come out of the consultation. As I said, these insights have been channeled into the drafting of the general comment itself. And we will release early next year a report that details the full findings of these consultations. I'll hand back to you, Biban. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And it's so interesting to hear where the focus of the young people has been. And I'm sure we'll have some questions about that later. Jutta Crowell is one of our steering group. She's also a mainstay of the IGF. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about why she feels it's so important that all of these things are interconnected and everybody's thinking about these things together. We're thinking about governance together. Jutta, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Biban, for giving me the floor, and hello to everybody who has now joined our session on digital cooperation and children's rights. As you see in my background, I'm responsible for a project called Child Protection and Children's Rights in the Digital World. And this somehow also reflects on kind of the history, how children have been seen in the internet governance. When you look back at the first ever World Summit of Information Society in 2003 in Geneva, and then 2 years later in Tunis, children were more or less not mentioned at all in the internet governance world. So of course, some people were talking about that access is a universal right, that everybody should have access to the internet, but then children were less mentioned, and it wasn't only considered maybe in the context of education that schools need to have access to the internet, but not children as an individual. So from that time on, I do think things have developed fast and quickly. And now that we know from research that all over the world, 1/3 of internet users is under the age of 18, as was already said, people will understand how important it is to address children in regard of internet governance. Also looking back then in 2007 at the Internet Governance Forum, the Dynamic Coalition on Child Online Safety was set up, which is now a large number of more than 50 individuals and organizations around the world dealing with issues of child online safety. And that was more or less also for many, many years the only focus that children were addressed in regard in internet governance, at the Internet Governance Forum, but also in other rounds of discussion and debates, looking at children as users of the internet that need special protection. And only within the last few years, I would say, we have a broader focus, and also all children's rights were taken in consideration when it comes to internet governance. That has put the whole discussion on children and their use of the internet in a new light, and that is also reflected in the report that Beben has already been talking about, the report, The Age of Digital Interdependence, that was produced by the High-Level Panel on Digital Cooperation convened by the UN Secretary General. And when you look into that report, there are lots of references to children's rights, not only as a subgroup to general human rights, but that children are considered as rights holders themselves, and that these rights need to be protected. When I look to the report, I can see that among other conventions in regard of human rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child is explicitly mentioned in Chapter 3, Individuals, Societies, and Digital Technologies. Then also the report focuses on children being at risk, mentioning that almost 1/3 of under 18s report having been recently exposed to violent or hateful contact or behavior online. And the report continues that it's necessary to develop guidelines how children should be approached in the digital age by business. So also their right to be protected from economic exploitation is addressed in the report. And the report explicitly states that the rights of children need especially acute attention. It also mentions that children go online at ever younger ages, and that is really important. It's mentioned in the report because the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child doesn't differentiate between the younger children and the older children. Children are people under the age of 18, and so it's necessary to address the younger children as well as human rights holders. So overall, one can say that the report pays attention to children's rights. I would say with a slight priority also to protection, as we have seen for a long time. So, and that is, I do think, a most important point when it comes to the general comment on children's rights in the digital environment, that it emphasizes the opportunities that the digital environment offers not only to children as users of the internet, but to exercise all their rights within digital media with the opportunities that are offered to them in the digital environment. And concluding on the report of the High-Level Panel on Digital Cooperation, one can say that it's now the time to set up the kind of the mechanisms and a concept for cooperation that really ensures that children are considered as right holders themselves, that have a great opportunity with the digital environment to exercise these rights in all areas of the world. And that's what we've learned from the consultation with children themselves that Amanda has reported just a few minutes ago, that children all over the world are aware of their rights, but sometimes they don't find the environment and the requirements that they have to make use of the digital environment to exercise their rights. So I do think that it's necessary when it comes to cooperation with all the stakeholders in the internet governance ecosystem, that we need to concentrate on enabling children, empowering children, that they can exercise their rights within the digital environment. I will leave it at that point, and I hope that we get some more questions and input from the participants to this session. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jutta. Now, shortly, I am actually going to ask the panelists some questions because they've raised some really interesting issues. But I would like support from some of you in the session to ask questions also. And I'm also happy to report that actually, after a bit of technical difficulty, we have been joined by one of the co-chairs of the working group from the Committee of the Rights of the Child, and I am going to invite her to make some comments later in this session. So very, very big welcome to Olga, and we're delighted to have you with us. But there is someone else who we're delighted to have with us, who is Tarek Kenny, and he flew from South Africa to join us in London, which it seems an age ago, when flying was a possibility and joining was a possibility. But almost a year ago, indeed a year ago, to an expert group of child rights activists and experts and academics, to all of whom were inputting. And we thought it was very important that we had some young people involved, and Tarek stopped the show and stop the experts in their tracks by some of the comments he made. So I am so grateful to you, Tarek, for finding time to join us today, and let me give you the floor.
Thank you. Good day, everybody. Just a brief introduction about myself and how it is that I got involved with this prestigious event. So as I said, my name is Tarek Kenny. I'm 19 years old. I'm a first-year student at the University of South Africa, currently studying for my BA in Communication Science. I also suffer from a chronically rare illness called cystinosis, which is due to the lack of amino acids in my body, which then later forms crystals, and this is distributed throughout every organ in my body, slowly attacking each organ in my body. And the result of this, in 2015, I received a kidney transplant. On top of this, I'm also a part of an amazing radio station called RX Radio, where I have both the roles of being a reporter as well as a board member. Now, what exactly is RX Radio? RX Radio is the world's first ever radio station by and for children within a hospital. So RX Radio has trained over the past 4 years. They've trained over 100 reporters ranging from the ages of 4 up until the ages of 18. And I think most importantly that RX Radio is an advocate for children's rights, because RX Radio prides itself on having the voices of children heard, allowing children to express themselves and tell their stories. So there was a global calling to contribute to the general comment, and then this was around about last year, and then RX Radio took part in this. And after our contribution, we were then contacted by the Five Rights Organization and asked if we would like to attend the expert discussion that was held last year in London. And I'm so glad that I was one of the two that was chosen to go and represent RX Radio in South Africa at this prestigious event. This was the first time that I was ever on an aeroplane, the first time that I ever traveled to another country. So it was really amazing getting out there. I enjoyed every single minute of there. I mean, I was overwhelmed by the scenery. But being at this event, I was the shortest and I was the youngest. And I was so shocked at how everybody there was chairmen, CEOs, people at PhDs, doctorates, and yeah, I just came out of high school, and everybody showed me this respect. People started conversations with me, wanted my input in these discussions. I mean, I was just so amazed that people, because I had no idea that people take me so seriously at this event. Sorry, I didn't mean to stop the flow and stop everybody in their tracks. I just spoke from my experience coming from a country of South Africa. And I think that the reason that my opinions were valid is because of the training and skill set that I was offered at RX and have their voices heard and teaches us how to network and socialize with people. So I do think that it's due that skill set and the training that I've received there that I was able to, just bring myself across there at this event. And the outcome of this event was amazing. I mean, I find it admirable that our leaders are trying to have policies put in place to ensure our safety online and the safety of the generations that are still to come. But as said, I'm from South Africa, and the access in South Africa is not really what we want it to be. Not everyone has fair and quality access to the internet. And just to give you a bit of context behind this matter, in South Africa a few years ago, we suffered from racial segregation called apartheid, which was, depending on your race, this would depend your standard of education that you would receive, your job, your salary, and in which area you would reside in. And even though we no longer live in apartheid, there are still those that suffer from the effects of apartheid. There are still those that are living in, certain areas where they are dominated by gang violence, those that have to go to public schools that don't have the necessary equipment to allow us to access the internet and access all these computers. And in South Africa, the internet service providers are charging quite a lot for us to have access to data. And like I said, those that have suffered from apartheid and haven't had the chances of receiving a high income are not able to afford the data. And as a result of this, there's many of the families that go without having access to internet, which leads to having no access to education, which just leads to this vicious cycle of people just continue to living in these poorer communities because they don't have the education that they need to go out there and get better jobs. And there is a certain way of getting access to internet, but as I said at the expert discussion, this could either result in two things. It's either result in you getting your education or you risking your life. Because living in a community such as I live in, the poorer communities, the places that are closest to go to where you could get your access to internet, you also take the charge of traveling a route where there are gangsters and people that would want to harm you, where you could possibly get robbed or possibly get shot as you want to go out there. And that came upon the entire world. This just made the whole situation so much worse because now the pupils were stuck at home and the children were stuck at home and they already don't have any access to internet. And now with this pandemic, they're not allowed to go outside to go to the places where they can get access to internet, and they would just have to stay inside. And as I said, their public schools that they attend also didn't really have the necessary equipment to send them emails and send them the necessary resources to keep up to date with the education. And I can vouch for that because for 4 months at the beginning of this year, my niece and my nephew have been residing by my mother and I. And as I saw that there was no education that they were receiving for a few days, I took it upon myself to start going on the internet and start researching the curriculum for the grades that they were in, going on YouTube, getting math videos and math tutorials and sitting down with them and trying to just teach them a little bit of work to keep their education up to date. So I do think that there is something that the government and the leaders of my country should do in order to make sure that everybody within this country, no matter of the effects of apartheid, that everybody should have equal and quality access of internet, because I said without internet, there is no information, and with no information, there's no education, which results in a vicious cycle of people not having jobs and people living in poorer situations, and the cycle just continues to unfold over and over again. Yeah, that's all from me. Thank you.
So I think maybe I could say you may have been the shortest and the youngest, but not the least wise. Thank you so much for that, Tariq. And if anyone had any problems with the sound, please ask questions of Tariq. Please try and get to his experience. And I do want to say, when he told me the story of the pandemic, because we were talking during the pandemic, and he talked about using some of his data to help educate his niece. I think you all have to understand that that was data that he, who is now going to university, actually was giving up for his own education. So I think that at the root of this, whilst we look for the quality and whilst we're looking to institute rights, we can never ever forget that affordable access is one of the most profound and necessary things for children around the world. So I see one question which I'm going to come to, and I'm very grateful to you for putting a question. I hope others will put some more questions, but I'm actually just for a second going to go back to Sonia and just, you know, ask a slightly difficult question, if I might, which is, you know, whilst we're discussing what children's rights look like, we keep on coming across this idea of how children's rights may or may not impinge on adult rights. And I just wonder whether there is a point of principle here, or whether you think it's actually a point of practice and implementation and weighing up and so on, and where your thinking has been during the drafting, because I know it's a constant worry.
Absolutely, Biban. I think it's been an incredibly unhelpful framing of the kind of debate in the last, really, ever since we've begun debating human rights in relation to internet governance. It's been a very unhelpful framing to pitch any groups against any others, as it were, parts of the world against each other, or those with particular needs against others. But the sense that children's rights to live in the world, including in the digital world, is somehow antithetical to adult rights is just the wrong way of thinking about it. And I think what we've been doing in the phrasing of the general comment, and I've never paid so much attention to the kind of exact phrasing of a text, is to try to find a language, try to find a way that doesn't say it's their rights against adult rights, but the internet, just like the wider world, must be a space in which everyone's rights can be realized. And if it seems that child protection is the classic, somehow is a restriction on adult freedom of expression, then we need to look very carefully at the traditional ways in which freedom of expression must be qualified according to context, and rights must have their way. Child protection must be possible, but you know, a lot of it is because the internet is such a kind of a bland, wide open space. You know, it is about creating different places where different kinds of activities occur, rather than exactly the same kinds of speech and opportunities for children applying in all of the digital world. So we need a more nuanced language. We need a more contextual understanding of where people go online and what they're trying to do, and how they understand, I think, what is possible and permissible in the different kinds of spaces that absolutely the internet can offer.
Yeah, fantastic. And actually picking up on that contextual point, I'd quite like to ask Amanda just what young people said about language, because that seems to be a really interesting thing. Do we have a Brave New World that's all in English? And what does that mean? I mean, that's another kind of access. So I'd be really interested to hear what you found out about that.
Yeah, no, language is a critical issue that came up for many children around the world, including children who communicate using sign. You know, simply a lot of children don't have access to resources that are in a language that they can speak and that are of sufficient quality to enable them to benefit from being online. You know, language is you know, we know that English is dominant on the internet, and there are a lot of minority group children around the world who are calling for better resources. But I think also language is, you know, it's not just intercultural barriers, right, to language. There are also generational barriers to language. And I think one of the really interesting things that came out of the consultation is that for many children, the terms that adults quite often use to describe their practices in digital spaces simply don't resonate for children themselves. So the idea of safety and risk, for example, when, you know, what we've found is that when adults talk about safety and risk, they tend to think about the conventional child online protection issues that many of us here in this forum are very well versed in. But for children, many of the risks that they face, and when they say the word safety, often what it means to them is actually safety in a sort of more social sense, a sense of, you know, being protected from, you know, I guess, how do you put it? You know, the terrible things that children can do to one another online, or the terrible things that adults can do to children online. You know, like they sense, in a sense, we're looking for a more social sense of safety. So I think we've got to be really, really careful how we mobilise language across these debates. And indeed, some other work we've just been doing has shown that you know, children in some parts of the world are receiving cyberbullying education, but that does not mean anything all that significant to children in their vernaculars, right? So I think we really have to pay very close attention to the ways that we articulate what we think both the risks and harms are. But also, I think importantly, we need to also develop a vocabulary, a shared vocabulary that crosses generations around what the opportunities of being online might be.
Right. And let me just ask you one more question very briefly, which is, you seem to allude to the fact that one of the things that came out most strongly for you was this idea of privacy for children. And I see that there's a question coming up from one of the participants on that for Tarek, but I'm just would love you to just extrapolate a tiny bit about what they mean by privacy, because I think in the adult, if you like, conversation, it becomes state versus commercial privacy. But I think it's more complex in a child world.
Yes, Bevan, it is very complex. Interestingly, though, I think, you know, in this consultation, what really came through is that the kinds of conversations that adults are having about privacy now are filtering down to children's ways of thinking about their digital practices. It was very, very clear that for children, you know, and even as we did another international consultation in 2017, which we also used, as you know, to inform the drafting of this general comment, among others. And back in 2017, it was really, children talked at length about privacy from their parents, privacy from friends, etc., etc. It was a very deeply sort of interpersonal sense of privacy at play in those conversations. Whereas this time around, that hadn't disappeared by any stretch of the imagination. They still do think about privacy in those kinds of terms. But alongside that, they've begun to talk about privacy in the kinds of terms that we've seen circulating in the mainstream media, particularly in the global north. It was less pronounced in the global south, but very strong in the global north. So really sort of, they really, yeah, like I said, they're very concerned about what's happening to their data. For them, privacy has now got a focus on data, whereas I think previously it hasn't. Yeah, and I don't think that's spontaneous. I think, you know, we obviously had to ask them about different kinds of privacy and get their views on it. But in the process, I think we opened up spaces for children to discuss those. But definitely, it's more on their mind. It's in the adults around, the lives of the adults around them, and it's playing out in their thinking.
Thank you for that. So at least we kill the myth that kids don't care about privacy. So that's a good thing. Jutta, there's a question here in the Q&A which I think belongs to you. It says, this sounds like a good process, but it's going to be slow, as are all these diplomatic channels. What immediate actions could we take while all this academic and diplomatic efforts are going on? I have great sympathy with this question, and I'm sorry to give you the job of answering it, Jutta.
Thank you. I'm happy to answer the question, because I do think this must be parallel efforts. So we couldn't wait till the academic and diplomatic actions are closed, finished, and then we start with immediate action in children's lives. What I see is that the outcomes of these academic and diplomatic actions are kind of a backdrop for all the activities that needs to be undertaken by any stakeholder that is engaged with children, with children's welfare by any politician and so on. So when I recall the guidelines that the Council of Europe has produced, guidelines to protect, respect, and fulfill the rights of the child in the digital environment, then this document was adopted 2 years ago, and it can be seen as a justification for anybody who is working on with children and on fulfillment of children's rights to say, yes, here are 48 countries around Europe that have some self-dedicated to fulfill the rights of the child. So if I'm working in a kindergarten, for example, and the organization might deny children the access to digital media, just saying because they are too young in kindergarten, then I can take the guidelines and say, here, your state as well, your government has adhered to these guidelines and has said, we see the importance of digital media in early childhood education. So there is no need to deny children the access to this. And so that is the way I do think it works, that we have the academic, the diplomatic, the politicians who are working on these, on guidelines, on cooperation structures and so on, but the activity needs to be taken by anybody, and then they can rely on these documents that we are producing, like the general comment, but also those guidelines and the high-level panel report. This is kind of a backdrop and a justification for the actions that needs to be taken in everyday life.
Thank you, Jutta. And there's another question here, which is actually aimed at you, Tarek, which is about worries about commercial exploitation of children online, strange ads on YouTube. It would seem that with all these data costs, not many kids would have the opportunity to be exploited because they're not actually online. Actually, it would be interesting to know that how much you feel the commercial pressure from your context and whether people are actually targeting young people in your environment, your context.
There isn't actually, well, as most people know, in South Africa is a country that is filled with a lot of crime. And I don't think that people would let the cost of data stop them from exploiting people and committing this crime. So as much as it happens all over the world, it happens quite a lot in South Africa because there's, there's a high amount of abduction happening, there's cyberbullying happening. So if people want to commit crime and do something, they won't let something as the price of data stop them. So there's quite a lot of us being exploited, and yeah, I hope I answered the question correctly.
But don't worry, it was a very interesting answer, whether or not. And I do want to actually pick up on one thing that you said earlier, because it's sort of so much of the emphasis of what you're discussing is around the problem of access, and you know that's the sort of specter of you walking through a gang-related place to try and get to Wi-Fi. You know, is something that the rest of us who live in different contexts have to take very seriously. But what was so striking is you used the word fair and quality when you talked about the access you wanted when you got there. And so there's one sort of worldview, and I think, to be honest, a lot of public policy has sat in this place for a long time and said, you know, access at any cost. Yeah. And what I feel when you speak, and I want to know whether that's what you intended to say or whether maybe there's some more to say about it, is, you know, if you're going to risk so much to get there, it should be good when you get there. And so I'm interested for you what fair and quality was in that sentence that you said.
Yeah, you're correct, because, you know, because I walked already to the internet cafe around the corner from me, and it was quite risky. And when I got there, the quality was not good. I only got to spend 20 minutes on the internet. They didn't have the necessary programs that I needed. The access of the internet was slow. So when I'm speaking about the fair and quality, what I mean fair is, you know, a price that is affordable for everyone. no matter of your financial status, a price that everyone can afford, and the quality, because there are certain areas within the country where people have a good quality, their network is quite good, but there are other areas in the country where people's network is slow. I mean, I know of students that have tried to submit their work for university, and just due to the bad quality of internet that they had, they weren't able to submit. I mean, they tried to submit 10 times over and over, and it resulted in some of them failing a module.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense to me. Now, there is a slightly complex question here, but the most important bit of which is the first sentence saying, many thanks for organizing this really interesting and highly topical conversation. So thank you for your support there. But I think that this is, you're asking here about access to the internet, and wondered whether this will be included as a substantive right or as a part of the broader right to education, and the whole question of whether access can be a right. And I might revert to Sonia again and ask, okay, I'll come back to you, Jutta, also. But Sonia, do you want to have a first jab at whether you think the context of the general comment is suitable for that, or whether this is where actually we sit alongside the high level panel and there's some things outside of the work that we're actually doing?
Absolutely. So I think it's very tempting when drafting the general comment to try to take the opportunity to put everything right for children and young people within the frame of one document. But of course, there are many debates going on at the level of the UN about the question of the right to internet access. So the position that we've taken, and I'll defer to Olga Kozova when she also comes in later, is to say the general comment is taking the Convention on the Rights of the Child and saying, how does this apply in the digital environment? And the way it applies, we've argued, is that internet access is vital for the realization of children's rights in the digital world. And to whatever extent it is provided, it should not be subject to discrimination or unfairness. So the Article 2 that says children should not be discriminated against absolutely must apply. But I think it is for other parts of the UN, perhaps, and other commissions to, as it were, wave the wand and say, everyone must have that access. Insofar as society relies on the digital, children's rights must be treated fairly through that means as in any other means, I think is what we would say. But it has taken, it is one of those interesting areas, because clearly, as Amanda's consultation showed, children and young people feel that accessing the internet is their right in a world in which everyone else is accessing it, and in which not accessing it leads to infringements on their rights. And that's where the problem is, and that's where states must act.
Thank you, Sonia. I know that Jutta wanted to come in on this question, actually.
Yes, I only wanted shortly to refer to the actual situation that with the COVID-19 pandemic, it has shown us like a burning lens that children could not exercise their right to education if they don't have access to the internet. And so I don't think we must put it explicitly in the general comment, but seeing how the right to education can only be exercised when you have access to the internet, it becomes obvious that access needs to be provided without discrimination to any child around the world. So it's just emphasizing, the current situation just emphasizes something that we already knew before, that we still have a digital divide, but now the justification is also the right to education that children have.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to slightly abuse the position of the chair to say that there's a local situation that is an answer to a degree to the question asked, which is that here in the UK, we recently had some emergency legislation to make remote learning, remote access compulsory in schools, but it didn't come with any sort of protections. And so now we have head teachers in their dozens, in their hundreds, saying, hang on a minute, we're getting pornography straight into the classroom. We're having problems of inappropriate material, inappropriate commercial activity in the classroom. We can no longer protect children in the classroom because there isn't sufficient balancing requirement. So I think this whole, that's why I love what Terry offered us about that it has to be fair, it has to be quality. And as part of that, we have to decide what is, what are the boundaries of what we can rightly expect a child to access in a school or educational setting, online or off. So now actually I noticed that in the chat, we've had another complicated but very interesting comment, which basically says, the internet of the second decade is no longer just a knowledge bank, a huge messy library as it was. It's evolved, and then it talks about a new sort of era of behavioral nature, desocialization, gambling addiction, uncontrolled waste of money, virtual bullying, etc., disclosure of personal data. It's there in the chat, and really the contributors basically saying we need a joint development of initiatives aimed at ensuring the safety of minors that covers all of this, and that UN member states must act. And I think that maybe with that in mind, I'm going to actually turn to Olga Kasova, who is the co-chair of the working group on the general comment from the Committee of the Rights of the Child. She's been an absolute leader for this piece of work and has stopped at absolutely nothing to get it done, including in this difficult time of COVID, making sure that the process of the committee has been sufficiently robust and the contributions sufficiently broad. So within the with that thought in mind, that every UN member state must pick up the mantle. Olga, perhaps you can share a few words with us.
Thank you, Biban, and very good afternoon or evening or morning, dependently on where you are. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I will start from where Biban has just stopped, about the whole range of issues. So the general comment has a very ambitious goal to cover everything. Whether we will manage, no, you probably have seen the draft, how it will work, we'll see, but this is the main idea, to cover all the complexities related to children's rights in digital environment. And that is particularly why it is hardly possible to overestimate the importance of this general comment. So we all speak non-stop that children now live both offline and online, and that digital environment has become their just normal way of life. And it concerns millions and millions of children. And I think Jutta has noted that 1/3 of internet users worldwide are below the age of 18. That means, in other words, they are children. In the CRC, in the opinion of the CRC committee, children's rights in digital environment need to be urgently addressed. And that is why it cannot be postponed any longer. And that is why it was decided to develop this general comment. This scary pandemic that we are currently have to live through and increased dependency on digital communication demonstrated how correct that decision was. Whether I understand all the disruption that COVID-19 brought to our life, but this is the reality. And also important to note that also linked to what Biban has just said, that digital environment in relation to children's rights raises the whole range of serious questions. To most of them, regrettably, there are no clear answers yet. We really, in many respects, are lost. We just don't know how to tackle these problems. We also need to understand that this is a very, I would say, peculiar thing about the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It was created in the pre-digital age. Nobody at that time could, in wild dreams, imagine how things could develop in this regard and where this could bring us. Therefore, it is not surprising that there is no single article in the Convention that directly, specifically refers to rights of children in the digital context. However, it turned out that the Convention is a true living instrument, and its provision, all the provisions of the Convention are fully applicable to children's rights in digital environment. I'm not sure I will manage to find any single article that has absolutely no relations. Some of them more related, less related, but I think all of them has, in this or that respect, relations to children rights. And we can find everything in the Convention. Everything is there. Access and non-discrimination, safety and protection, the best interests of the child and child rights to be heard, the right to life, survival and development, the right to have access to information, freedom of expression, and the right to peaceful assembly, family environment and privacy, education and health, children in extreme situations, training of professionals, and so on and so forth. It's not an exhaustive list of issues, and I will come back to access a bit later because of the question. As it seems to me, one of the main difficulties relates to the fact that digital environment impacts on children's rights both in positive and negative ways. And therefore, we need to differentiate between, on the one hand, the right of a child to have access to digital technologies and the right to enjoy all the benefits that are connected with digital technologies. And on the other hand, the right to be protected against harm and all the risks associated with digital environment. To combine these two approaches is a true challenge for all of us who work on general comment. You all probably noticed that draft general comment and the work of the committee in this regard has attracted an incredible amount of attention. It brings a huge, even more responsibility on us. Say, for instance, we received 135 submissions to concept note, and now we are awaiting for the comments to the draft GC, and we have already received a lot, and they will, I look through some of them, they will certainly help us to improve the text. Also, I would like, regarding the work on the general comment, also I would like to highlight the following thing. The committee's working group has been working really very hard on the text and to improve it, to amend it. And I would like to note that dedication of the working group was really remarkable. Just Biban knows that. Just an example. Our committee May session has been cancelled due to COVID-19. However, the working group decided to work online on the draft beyond the session in order not to lose time. We all understood that GC couldn't wait. It needs to be urgently finalized, as far as depends on us, at least. And we had been working via Zoom almost every single day during May and half of June, and also half of August, in order to finalize the text and make it ready for being placed at the CRC webpage for public consultation. Of course, there is still a lot of work ahead, but I'm convinced, and I need to also mention Amal Al-Dosari, who is a co-coordinator together with me. We discussed it many times that this would be certainly a very special general comment, I'm sure. Now I would like to come to the question of access. No, basically, it has been already answered, but I need to highlight that access, yes, the right of access, this was articulated by children. It's already in a kind of a established right, because children did it. And we can read it in very many paragraphs of the draft general comment. It goes through the whole text, but specifically it is addressed, of course, in the right to non-discrimination piece. I will just read a short piece of this part. The right to non-discrimination requires that states ensure all children, including children of lower income families and children living in rural and remote areas, have equal and effective access to the digital environment in ways that are meaningful for them. States should take all necessary measures to lower the cost of connectivity, provide free access to children in safe, dedicated public spaces. It links to what our dear friend and colleague from South Africa said, and invest in policies and programs that support all children's use of digital technologies at school, home, and in their community, and so on. I stop here. So it's clear that without access, there is nothing. We cannot talk about anything with regard to digital environment if there is no access. And when we speak about access, we mean low cost access, good connectivity, good quality, and etc. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Olga, this is fantastic. And I have to say, as wonderful as it is that we can all be all around the world and sharing this space, that I know that if we were in a hall all together, we would stand up on our feet and cheer at that unequivocal answer on access. And I think that it's been so thematic in this conversation, and it's so brought to life by what Tarek says, to have something so strong from the committee and from our working group chair is really, really wonderful. So I really thank you for being here at all, but also for that very specific contribution. And I can see all my colleagues up here smiling and beaming that the access question has been answered categorically. I am actually going to just shift the conversation a tiny little bit now, and I'm actually going to ask Sonia to just make a small contribution around automated systems. And the reason that I want to bring it in is that when we overlap our world with the technical world and our colleagues who work with and in tech, this seems to be the problem, is how does an automated system work? And when we interrelate and talk to our child's rights experts, it sometimes gets missing. And if I can put the question in a slightly, ruthless way, and Sonia, if children's rights are not explicitly put into the system, do we automatically create a world in which there are no rights.
If we build systems which are blind to human rights issues, it seems on current practice, we build systems which infringe and abuse human rights. And we see this in a whole range of ways. So I think it's fantastically heartening that there is a very pressing debate now, I think, around rights and ethical issues and issues of discrimination, crucially, around technology. But I would just add to that. I mean, it's been a kind of a running theme, I think, in the drafting of the general comment and in all our discussions, that even though it's about children's rights in a digital world, you know, a digital world is, if you like, a phrase that summarizes many complex processes. The whole point is that the digital world is enacted by states, by companies, by stakeholders, by very many organizations. Sorry, my phone was going. As the technology interrupts and disrupts sometimes. I just want to make a really clear and simple point. Organizations operate and enable and enact these machine learning, the algorithms, the recommendations, all the technologies. And we've tried to direct the general comment very crucially to those organizations, and especially to the states, which have the obligations to ensure that organizations don't use processes which infringe rights. So it is slightly indirect, if you like. The general comment is speaking to the states and their obligations. The states have obligations to ensure that businesses and technologies meet their responsibilities, and that in combination, children's rights must not be infringed. And I just add as one last thought, it's been very important in the drafting of the general comment to really highlight the importance of remedy, and remedy that is accessible to children, and to emphasize the importance of independent oversight so that we know what is happening. Because what's very clear, and I think what worries many people about machine learning, is that we don't understand, we don't know, and that all the organizations that have things to say to ensure children's rights are realized are somehow kept out of the process because of the complexities of the technology. So a lot of those states measures about independent oversight, about being evidence-based, about ensuring kind of transparency and proper remedy for children. This is all just so crucial as the technology gets more complex. It's always operated by somebody, and that's where we have to focus.
Thank you for that. Amanda, I also wanted to come to you on another sort of thing that you referred to, but we haven't quite sort of bottomed out. But you know, this idea of misinformation and the fact that this is a community, as in the young people are a community who get information not exclusively, but very, very largely, certainly in the global north, online, and then where that intersects with misinformation. And, you know, we've seen it very much around the COVID health misinformation, that children believe the conspiracy theories in greater numbers because that's where they get their information from. And I just wonder whether you wanted to sort of talk to the importance of that, or the general comment making some ground in that area, because it's a very contentious area.
It is a very contentious area, Biban, and I think what was clear from the consultation is that it's also contentious for children. Indeed, they feel simultaneously overwhelmed by information and underwhelmed by the quality of information that they're encountering. And I think that, you know, they see adults as really having to take responsibility for helping them to regulate the kinds of information they encounter, but also making sure that pool of information they can access is of a much higher quality. So I think there are some very, very clear demands from children there. I do think, you know, health is a really, really interesting example where we see information playing out, and, you know, not least because it's top of mind at the moment with the pandemic. But I think, you know, we need to really begin to tailor the kinds of quality information that are available to children to their specific understandings, but also to address their very particular questions. I think, you know, what in the pandemic's a wonderful example in the sense that we've been quite good, I think, at pumping out some good quality resources around the pandemic as a health issue, as a medical issue. But of course, the pandemic has actually been fundamentally a social issue, and we haven't actually dealt with those questions from children. And the questions that they have are ones that, you know, around issues that impact their mental health, like the arguments they witness between their parents, or, you know, increased tensions because of job losses in the home, and or having to take more responsibility on one front or another, and so on. So so I think, you know, we can use technology to really to develop forms of information that actually really respond to children. But this brings us back to the point of working closely with children in a systematic and ongoing way. I think one of the biggest challenges to realising children's full range of rights is that we still don't make enough room for their participation rights. And I think, you know, in the case of health information, what this would entail is actually having a process where children can regularly feed back to health authorities or medical practitioners, or, you know, experts who are in a position to respond in a consistent and ongoing way. You could use digital to realise that right for children, and this is where the digital is about facilitating a whole range of rights, not just, you know, those that we commonly associate with technology. But, you know, if you could establish a process which engaged children in a more regular way, we could tailor the information that we provide via these platforms much better. But of course, you know, that doesn't tackle the challenge of misinformation, and I'm very, very hopeful that that the general comment will you know, inspire us into action around, you know, those big issues around misinformation, children's lack of trust in media outlets, you know, phenomena like fake news and so on.
Thank you, Amanda. And actually, I'm going for all the big thorny issues here because, Terry, there's been a lot of contention around the role of parents in all of this, because, you know, some people say that the technology is such that the parents can't really look after children and it has to be designed to be safer. Some people say, often the tech companies included, that parents are responsible for their children and they have to deal with everything. And you've been asked here in the question feed, what is your advice to parents, or do you have advice to parents, you know, that you can share with us?
This is exactly what myself and Alex and Yoli contributed in the article, because even though my mom is not too clued up with technology and that, I waited quite a while until I got my first cell phone, and my first cell phone where I could actually WhatsApp. My first actual phone was after I graduated high school, and in high school I did have a cell phone. But I think the advice that I could give is probably what mom used to do. So she only gave me my cell phone after the age of 15. So I would say if a parent could monitor the child and monitor the maturity within your child and see if your child is willing to take responsibility for certain actions, then that is the time when a child could probably have a cell phone of its own. And then obviously monitor what your child is doing. My mom always used to take my cell phone from me, go through my cell phone, look who I'm chatting to, what am I researching and things. And one thing that RX Radio does as well, in order to keep us safe, they have blocked all the websites that could be harmful to us. So I think get clued up on how to restrict certain websites and certain things that are harmful. Know when your child is at a maturity level where they are responsible enough to have access to a cell phone, and also inform them on the dangers that they could come across. I think that it's important to be open with them, because sometimes not every child might know that maybe this thing that they be looking at is harmful to their health. So educate them on what is harmful. Get educated yourself on how to restrict certain things, and monitor your child and know what maturity level they're at in order to grant them with this form of technology.
Thank you so much, Tariq. I'm going to ask Jutta one question, which is that sort of in the background of my mind, just as being another version of the question of, is this too slow? Do you think that there is a sort of a danger that we're still arguing about the problem and we're not actually getting quite to the solutions in much of the work that's going on in the international community? Or do you think that on some sort of, there is a Venn diagram of agreement, that, an 80-20, and we can go forward with the 80 that we all agree on? I'd just be interested in your thoughts about that.
Oh, that's not an easy question to be answered within only 4 minutes before our debate is. Once again, referring to the report, which is called The Age of Digital Interdependence, I would say also these things that you have been asking are interdependent. We cannot work on a solution without discussing before. So we need the debates, we need to engage more stakeholders that maybe have not yet been engaged in these debates. And that is also a development I have seen over the years in internet governance, that we are getting the better the more we expand the circles of people that are involved in our debates. And I'm really happy to see with this debate today, although I can't see the names and the affiliation of the people that are taking part in our session due to the webinar style, I do see that we had around 50 people over these 90 minutes. And I'm pretty sure that the way that we are now holding the virtual internet governance forum also makes it possible that people take part in these debates that have not been engaged before, just due to the fact that they have not been able to travel around the world to fancy places where the forum was held. So, and there I see really a huge opportunity that we engage more people that are working on these issues around the world, that we spread the messages that we have come up with. But it's not that those people are the wisest. We can engage much more people who have more knowledge, more experience from certain areas of the world. And if we draw on that experience and on that knowledge, I do think we can make a huge step forward. Does it answer your question in a way?
I think it does in a way. And I am actually cognizant of the time. So what I am actually going to do is two things. First of all, I need to apologize for someone who put in the chat a question which I didn't see. So, and it was about the nature of harms. And I have to say, I spend my daily life trying to sort out the nature of harms. And if you go to the Five Rights website, we've got all sorts of things that may be of interest to you particularly. I also just want to thank my colleagues in the steering group, Amanda, Jutta, and Sonia. But I am going to be inequitable, if I might be, and thank in particular Olga for joining us today, for the committee for undertaking this work, for the seriousness of the work, and for making sure that this happens, that the general comment happens for children. And of course, to Tariq, who the first time I met him was brilliant. The second time I met him was brilliant. He's still brilliant. And I really, really thank you for your words. I take them very, very seriously. And I think, and I hope that you feel that Olga's commitment on access answered your demand. So I'm very happy to have brought you together. And with that, I really want to thank everybody who came today. Please do know that the consultation is still open. It's it's up. I think the link is about to come. And also there is, of course, a children's consultation, which also the link will be up in a moment. So thank you all for participating. And I really am grateful to you all. Thank you very much.
Thanks for wonderful moderation, Beeben. Thank you so much.
I'm just waiting for it to finish. I can't see.